what I want to do is just kind of, I'm going to go through, talk about the process that these came from. They're intentionally cryptic in the sense that we haven't labeled things. There's not a lot of dialogue. We do have a, can somebody grab the little flyers that we had up there? Talk about, you know, there's a Reader's Digest version of paragraphs of it too. But I was going to go through a presentation. I was thinking at the end we could have some questions, some dialogue, because it raises a lot of questions. Probably raises more questions than it answers. I've got Mike Nesbitt here, who might work with me on these. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it's really intended, this is part of Shubin and Donaldson's commitment to R&D. I don't know how else to put it. We actually, Miles Shoto, Dr. Shoto is our director of R&D at our office. And Miles' sole job and purpose in life now is to advance kind of experimental and different ways of pushing architecture, materiality into the process in particular, and it's kind of part of our design process. And I would say that this whole effort of doing these drawings and so on is really kind of grown out of that. Also, I just had a personal interest in drawing since before I even started architecture. I think most of you could share that, right? I often joke that got me into architecture. I blame it on that, because I was a kid drawing and making stuff. I would guess 99% of us in the room do exactly that. So this is, in a sense, it's kind of just taking drawing in another direction. I call them drawings. I also call them artifacts. I don't really call them art. This is really an art exhibit. It's more about architecture. It's intended to be. They are framed. It raises a whole bunch of other issues, but as we go through, I'll talk about it, and hopefully we'll have a little more clarity about our attitude about it. And of course, we're open to being challenged. Mike and I have talked about this in a lot of different settings and been, you know, articulately challenged on the notions of what a drawing is. Okay, so probably about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We'll do this and then we'll get to ready. So, learning objectives, have to show this. We'll talk about these because they're actually the role of use of different technical processes in the production of architectural drawings. The different applications of drawings during and after the construction process. And the use of abstraction as a drawing technique to explore the architectural design process. I want to talk about precedents for a second. There is a precedence, obviously, in architectural drawing. One exhibition in particular that I found interesting was about 2001. It was a show that traveled, started in San Francisco. It was a major gallery. It's called Perfect Acts of Architecture. And Jeffrey Kipnis, in the book, the introduction to the book, and the show had kind of three distinctions that he talked about what a perfect act of architecture was. And architectural drawing can function in any of three ways: as an innovative design tool, as the articulation of a new direction. In other words, you haven't built something yet, you've got an idea about how you're going to build it, and the drawings help convince people. And then ultimately, as a creation of consummate artistic merit. So artistic merit in the sense that it's considered thoughtfully, could hang on a gallery wall, and it would be engaging. So put simply, a perfect act of architecture achieves all three at once. I'm not asserting that these drawings are a perfect act of architecture, but I think it gives a little bit of it gives a framework under which you can start to consider architectural drawing in the context of a presentation like what we're doing here, like a gallery setting. By the way, one note on the space. This used to be a retail space called Tuesday Morning, just full of junk, basically. I ventured into it one time with my wife and kids. I would never do it again. Mike and I were on the look for a space, and we came down here, and it was all grayed out, and the owner of the space couldn't figure out what to do with it. She painted it white, and we told her, this is going to be perfect for what we're doing, and she couldn't believe that you could do anything with this space. But I think in the part of the point of what we're doing is in putting them up and putting them up in a space is to kind of recontextualize the space. So it's now obvious that it can work in this manner, right? Where before it wasn't obvious. And that's, again, kind of part of the process of doing this. And we're always on the lookout for spaces to kind of claim, to reframe in different ways. And they're all around us, obviously. Another aspect of precedence is, and this was in that show for Active Architecture, this is a silk screen that I worked on back in my days when I was at Morphosis. And this is a drawing of Tom Main's 6th Street house, his own house. It was never realized quite in this form, but he went through a whole series of drawings that Andrew Zotto did. And then I went to New York, and with a printmaker in New York for a few months in a basement, not unlike this basement, printing this set of drawings. And that was, when I did that, was 1988. You know, that was 30 years ago. And so, obviously, that piqued an interest for me in doing drawings and this whole process. Mike Nesbitt has also been roped into the Morphosis machine and worked with Tom Main extensively on a series of really lithographs, right, Mike? And that are just incredibly beautiful. And the lithographer that we worked with on these lithographs also worked on those with Tom. He's a master lithographer, fine art lithographer. Silk screening is a really interesting process. I'll talk more about it in a minute. And what you see today are basically two types. There's silk screens and lithography. The smaller pieces are lithography, the larger pieces are silk screens. The actual screens themselves are in these alcoves up on the north side of the building. And we thought that the screens themselves are actually pretty damn beautiful. Just making those objects, they're just really compelling. So one of the things we find, you know, all of us work in BIM and CAD, I assume, and probably to some degree do in drawings. But we're interested in the manipulation of those drawings. And even though they're CAD, computer-drawn drawings, you have an operator, right? And the operator is deciding how you draw the drawings. And in fact, you have a tendency to manipulate the drawings in the computer be legible in the way we know architectural drawings should be legible, right? Line weights, things like that. The machine doesn't always understand that, but we still manipulate them to be legible by our standards of architectural kind of legibility. All of us went to school, we've all read architectural drawings. So what I'm putting forward is that we're manipulating them, and they were manipulated here as well. The BIM and CAD drawings that you see here are used for a new purpose. All of the base line work here was all done in the purpose of building a building. We had no intention while we were doing this line work to someday create an artifact like what you're seeing now. This was completely mined, you know, Peter just said, you know, like we mined the project. We did, we went back in and we started to grab different files of the project. Today, you've got 3 different projects. I'll talk about that in a second. But each one, we've kept the files on those projects consistently applied in each of the pieces. And one of the things that we're discovering, too, is that BIM and CAD drawings are easily deployable in different mediums. So, as you all know, those digital files can go in a lot of different directions. We can make big prints, we can do some PDFs. Now, we're doing drawings using our laser. You know, we have a laser cutter in our office. We're putting lines, you know, line work into the laser cutter and cutting different kinds of pieces just from using those drawings. So I just think that as architects, we should pay attention more to the artifacts that we're generating in the process of making a building. Anything you want to add to that, Mike?
No, I think that's well stated, and I think it's important to understand as architects. You know, we have drawings as means of representation to build something. And then that representation and how we build things, the tectonic nature, whether we're pouring a concrete slab, how's it form, it's a steel building, etc. There's certain response to the way we make things, to how we represent it. And I think that works at all scales. So even when we start thinking about the drawing and the nature of how we produce the drawing, whether we're drawing it through a computer or then we're printing through a silk screen, there's a consequence to that in that representation. I think to think in multiple scales at the end of the day not only helps the architecture, but it helps the drawing, which helps the architecture.
And I think we'll talk a little bit about the feedback loop that starts to happen after you do something like this. So different application drawings during and after the construction process. So we use the drawings to represent what is to be built, right? When we're doing the drawings, we're thinking contractor needs to build. We also have a process where we're looking back and kind of representing what has been. Submit drawings, say for an AIA or something, or a book or something like that. We have a tendency to go back, kind of re-look at drawings after something's been built. And then in this particular case, we're really exploring in the sense of using drawings to explore what might be built. So I could assert that these drawings now are starting to tell me something about how I might build on the next project. And so it starts to get to be kind of a loop. In other words, the kind of compositional sort of methodology we went through to make the drawing starts to become and inform the methodology that we might bring to the design process, maybe to build it. The other notion is the use of abstraction drawing techniques for the architectural design process. So abstraction is an interesting issue. These artifacts that we've produced here, we like to think of them as being they're not representational of the work. In other words, you don't look at these drawings and say, oh, that's such and such project, necessarily, but they are referential in that they tie back to the projects that they were created from, the line work that they were created from. And you'll see that in a second when I start talking about the different projects and how we did that. There's a whole tectonic aspect of line work and meeting, organizational principles and laying down line work. Line work represents different things, topography, elevations, things like that, the different types of line work, and also the meaning embedded in that different types of line work. A lot of people kind of said, oh, some of these drawings look like charts, for instance. And the one series kind of should look like charts, because they were based, in fact, Mike and I have talked about the color, and that's the series over there with the 9. We started talking about the colors and aeronautical charts, and it had something to do with this project, how it reads from the sky. As the 5th elevation of this project is the plant. That led to some line waves and colors that you start to pinpoint somewhere in a whole field of abstraction. Discovering new formal relationships and form the next project. One of the things that starts to happen when we extract different shapes and forms, I mean literally shapes and forms from the line work, is you start to see another aspect about the project. And it starts to make me, in some of the cases, makes me want to go back and rework the project. But those ideas kind of stay alive. And in fact, I'm working on another project right now. I want to see what the AR can draw. It's starting to affect that process. I go back and I look at it and go, oh, wait a minute, this piece could move here, this could do this. And I wouldn't have gotten there without doing the drawings, essentially.
And I think to add to that, I think the importance of architecture is such a discipline, and there's such a kind of rigor and seriousness to kind of producing ability that I think a lot of times you could kind of get lost in the repetitive rigor that, in a certain sense, by producing kind of a set of abstraction allows for ingenuity and something to come outside of that practice that can give you something. And I think that playfulness, and kind of putting you back in that childlike state, at the end of the day, makes it fun. Because I know a lot of people, they practice architecture, it's not fun. This is...
Yeah, we managed to squeeze the fun out of it. And doing this process was fun. I kind of had time and other members of the team that worked on it. It was,
serious fun.
But at the end of the day, So what you see in here today are 3 series of drawings. We call them Hillcrest, Woodley, and Tremonto. This is how we refer to the projects in the office. Hillcrest is a project in Beverly Hills. All 3 of these have something in common in that they're big architectural estates, essentially. And they have a lot of work done on them from an architectural kind of design standpoint. And they're all, 20,000 square foot plus homes with ridiculous budgets, and took a long time to do. And the clients take them very seriously, and we do too, in the sense of respecting what we did. And so it seemed, and the fact that there are 3 different buildings of 3 of the same kind of use, we thought that in a sense there was a series here. But if you look at them, you're going to see there's a big difference in the look and feel of these as there are in the projects. I'll give you a glimpse of the project so you can have a context for that. So first project is called Hillcrest. And by the way, these projects have been under strict NDAs for years. That would take our kids, when you read these things, you just shake your head in disbelief. But anyway, so a lot like these renderings and things like that have not been out anywhere. This project is under construction. It'll be done at the beginning of the summer, so it's about 8 months away. This is one in Truesdale Estates in Beverly Hills. Series of courtyard and a whole bunch of series of formal operations that relate to the site, views, the program. It digs into the site under the ground. It's been developed sectionally in a very kind of particular way. You might even have drawings to show that. This is the upper floor plan. And some of this line work, some of this was some of the line work that we pulled, right?
Yeah. I think it was important to kind of pick parts of the projects and a certain sense kind of distill the project. And I think that there was kind of geometry, ideas of geometry, but then I think also the actual, this is the line from the contract was built.
And in this case, just you have a sense of scale for whatever it's worth. That's kind of collage. And part of the process that we started to generate where this was going to start going. And then you create plates. So in the lithography process, you'll have multiple plates that lay down different colors. And then those build up in layers. This starts to represent some of the plates. Got middle images, just one of the plates. This is just a clip from one of the sketchbooks and started to influence kind of the color palette. I've had a habit for the last 15 years or so. I keep sketchbooks, keep 10-inch by 10-inch sketchbooks. I now have a pretty good stack of them where I constantly am doing kind of drawings related to projects, but drawings not related to projects. Things that sometimes are color related. This is where the notion of masking started to come from. So I do a lot of masking in the drawings. And when we started doing the printing process, I started throwing masking and some of the things I do in the sketchbook, I started doing on the printing process. So I started sticking pieces of paper and the lithography machine that's supposed to go in there, things like that block stuff out. I wouldn't have done that had I not been doing sketchbooks for all these years.
And I think to that, real quick, as far as a technique that developed from the physicality of making something, the physical prints, that kind of masking strategy that developed as a physical thing, then actually started to work itself back in to the kind of digital representation. And so there's that, I think that kind of feedback loop, kind of making something, finding something new within the making, and then now taking that technique back to start something else and incorporating it early on.
And it's starting to creep its way into representation, how we represent projects and photography, things like that. So, selection, photography. But it's just, all of these ideas have a way of kind of creeping back in ways that you wouldn't have known. And it wouldn't have happened had we not gone through the process of doing that. This project is called Woodley. This is on Woodley Road in Montecito. Again, it's been under an NDA for a long time. Now I think it's pretty public. And this is a big kind of concrete home. embedded in the earth. It's under construction right now. Footings are being poured as we speak, and will be something to contend with. So, yeah, it's quite. I don't know how else to put it. Let's put it this way: the clients have a lot of courage and have gone fully into this, and it's significant presence. I kind of consider this, in my practice, there's kind of been two major residences. One was the Crawford residence that I did when I was with Morphosis, kind of got me up here in Santa Barbara, honestly. And then this house, and there's really a relationship between the two. That's a whole other discussion. But it seemed worthy of an exploration in terms of lithography and the language project. That's a kind of an aerial, really awful rendering, but gives an idea of the project, of the landscape. These are some interior renderings of the project. Floor plan, and make that out. These are some of the formal studies of some of the concrete work inside. I'm doing working with Gary Technologies on rationalizing all of this geometry, and then all of the formal work is being built by C.W. Keller back east, using digital files, CNC cutting, and so on to make these plywood, essentially cabinetry. This thing that come out and make it fall. But I just want to get a sense of it, because some of the geometry that we're doing. And pulling files from some of C.W. Keller's work, from Gary Technology, which is CATIA, some of the Rhino work that we've been doing, and so on, to generate the project. And data from the site, and so on. And I started to make a series, again, a series of plates for the lithography. And those plates then started to get laid in layers. And as we're doing it, you know, we do two things. One, we've made a series where there's actually a series of 9, which is on the wall over there to the left. That was the repeated series. And then once we've got the series going, then we started doing the monoprints. And the monoprints are literally, it's spontaneous and improvisational, because you're having to do it as the printer's printing, right? And you have to make these decisions, how you put the paper in, the colors.
And I think that there's, I mean, I'm very interested in judgment and the disciplinary aspect of looking at things. I mean, we're relying on Francesco Siqueiros, who's a master printer who's been working on the press for 30 years, kind of runs this really understanding the choreography of printing, to then like the things that Robin's bringing to the table, it's kind of like kind of personal sensibility and masking. There's kind of all these things that kind of working together to produce like these. I guess it allowed like a jazz sense to allow us to just kind of just freely flow.
Yeah, so we were kind of messing with this process, like Francesco, master printmaker. I'm like, can I put this piece of paper inside your machine and let it go through? And he's like, oh no, well, okay, you can try it. And it worked, you know. And fortunately, he had the right attitude to be able to do it. And he's in downtown LA, really interesting, great guy. Works mostly with people who know what they're doing. I like this stuff. Some detail work. You can get this beautiful about the lithography, you can get an amazing resolution, especially with lithography like Francesco. And we kind of played with the, you'll see in the prints, they kind of played with the variations in the line work and clarity of the line work and so on. Yeah, it's something we had everything. So that's what led to, putting them on, finding a space and putting them on the wall. Really, at the end of the day, I wanted to see them. Tremonto was the last series, and Tremonto is referential to the silk screens that are on the back wall and the silk screens that are at the front of the space. And Tremonto is in Pacific Palisades, residence completed. And again, we kind of mined line work from this project and started to deploy it. in different ways, starting to explore different color relationships and things like that. And as that line work then started to generate screens, there's 3 screens, there's actually 4 screens. And in the case of the Tremonto series, we didn't do a series, like a repeated series. All of Tremonto silk screens are all monoprints. Each one is different. And I think there's 20 maybe, 18 or 20? 18.
It's funny, I mean, I think in relationship to architectural practice, like, these were by far the most design built. You know, if the other ones had an intention of like, you know, okay, you're gonna make a series, when we're talking about the series, I think at this point, there was a sensibility and understanding of the processes and how we were working to just kind of, to just produce the more kind of design build and sensibility.
Color became a discussion. We were looking at this point at creaking aluminum, which is a whole other discussion. We ended up, we may do that again at some point. We ended up just with paper, 60-inch paper pieces. And started on the printing process. And is anybody in here silk screen before? Silk screening is just a wonderful process, but it has to happen fast. It's physical. You're moving big pieces of paper, the screens, getting, mucking about in all of the inks and everything. And it was frankly really, and we knocked these out in about 8 to 10 hours. The series was done.
Paper was better than it used to be. It's still
Pretty much.
I mean, these were oil days.
Yeah, it's all about this. So, yeah, you get a good buzz on it. Which leads to stuff like this. Right? A series of decisions, right? So some of which are decisions that Mike had already, or some techniques that Mike had already done some of his work. And as you mentioned, look up Mike's work. So he has a beautiful series of work. But for instance, these big swipes of the ink. That's without a screen. It's basically, swiping the ink across the paper, things like that. I started masking it and working with the composition in different ways. So bring them back to the office, look at them. They all take on personalities, are like different kids, so to speak, and end up in here. And I think that the main takeaway from all of this is that we're all generating a lot of, let's call it artifacts, right? In our practices. And I think we need to take that stuff more seriously than we have a tendency to. And it might be related to how seriously you take a project, possibly, or yourself, but we're all doing some pretty interesting stuff. And there's different ways to go about it. This is the way I've chosen to kind of go about it. I think this will lead into a whole other series of things that we're interested in doing. Once you start something like this, it starts to want to step into something else. But my takeaway really is pay attention to what you're doing. Just look at the drawings again, look at them differently, and engage in the discipline, what we're doing. We have a very interesting, beautiful discipline that has all kinds of different ways of manifesting itself. And I think within our office, the more we kind of take that seriously, I think culturally people start to engage in their work in a different way. They start to see it differently. And I think the clients start to see us just differently, kind of it builds on itself. So I think in questions, we've been doing a lot of talking, so you got Mike and I here, open questions.